Hello, everyone. Welcome to my podcast, Conversations with My Friends in AI. Today, we have a special guest, James Sanders. James, I met through collaborating at my current job. He was working at Wayfair. I'm currently at Arise. And we just got to talking a little bit outside of that context. And I learned a little bit more about the personal projects he's been working on. And I was like, dude, you got to come on my podcast. Like, this is so cool just to walk through our audience, how you've been approaching personal projects. So that's the topic we'll be diving in today. But before we jump in, James, I'd love to pass it over to you. Really just like do a quick intro and tell us a little bit about your background and career journey so far.
Yeah, well, why don't we just start at Wayfair? So I was on the product management side there at Wayfair on the machine learning platforms team, and that's how I got to know Claire. I put together the original requirements for the model portfolio monitoring there, so that was very good to get to know Claire and her team. So spent quite a bit of time there helping data scientists and machine learning engineers to get their models to market faster, higher quality. And then before that, I was at Data Robot and built and launched a couple of offerings for them, which was great. That was my first real foray into machine learning and AI. And then prior to that, I started off in software engineering. I did a computer science degree and spent a lot of time building software, did a startup for a few years, was a co-founder, spent a lot of time in product management, but really wanted to get my hands back dirty again with the data. And that was why I headed down the data science and machine learning path, and really getting really hands-on now, building a lot of cool models I think we're going to be talking a little bit about.
Yeah, it's amazing. Cool. Thanks for walking us through that. And also a Colorado local, which is really cool to see. Great to see
love it.
AI presence here. Cool. Well, let's dive in. We're going to talk through some of these personal projects that you worked through, and we'll give like a little bit of chronological breakdown of the projects, then dive into kind of some tips and tricks here. I think the first thing that stood out to me about your personal projects is that you were actively finding people to collaborate with. And I see so many people just doing a personal project in a silo alone. You and I have worked in large corporations. We know that working in a silo is not really the best way to work. And so I really like how you approached this with finding people to collaborate with. I'd love to have you like talk us through that a little bit, like how you found the people and kind of the value that it brought to you.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I wanted to make sure of was, as much as possible, that the projects that I'm working on are sort of applicable and solving real problems. And one of the ways I find best to do that is to find people in those domains that I'm working in who I can collaborate with, who can help me work out what what projects are to work on and where to find the data, because of course that's always a big one. So I was how did I go about finding those people? Well, a couple of ways. One way was I sort of had a bit of a hit list of a few companies that I discovered that looked really interesting, working on really interesting stuff. And I just sort of started pinging a bunch of people at those companies about what they were working on and asking them questions and talking about what I'm working on. And I ended up getting connected to some pretty interesting people that way. I ended up working with a data scientist at the University of Stanford School of Medicine, and he's been great. He's helped me put together this breast cancer survival model, and so he sort of acts like a customer and a little bit of a guide. And so it's great to have sort of like a real customer who can make sure that you're on the right track and you're sort of delivering value. So that was one. And then I had another couple that I just met through my network. And those ones have really, there's a guy from NVIDIA, James Skinner, who's really helped me out. And also Aaron Epple from STEM, who's an AI company focusing on renewable energy. And he's the one who helped me out get my focus and scope out my electric load forecasting model project. So yeah, it's really been helpful to have real people who know the domain sort of acting as customer, and it's more fun too. Like if you've got some people who can help you, who can work with you, and if you get stuck, they can help you out. And yeah, it's just like it's more fun working as a team than than by yourself.
It truly is. And I feel like it also like simulates what a real project is going to be once you land that dream job. And so that's kind of been like the missing piece that I notice in a lot of personal projects is they're just done. I mean, really taking personal project a little too literally, like alone. And it's not as fun as you're saying, but also you're missing that like customer feedback. I think it's so important to like build for people. Even if it's like a friend, a family member, like it just you kind of simulate that customer feedback cycle, which is awesome.
Yeah, and also they can help you get connected, obviously, to other people. So it's sort of
Yes.
like a part of bigger sort of networking strategy, right? So
100%. You're building that network.
yeah, so I've been able to. They've introduced me to quite a few other interesting people who are working on good stuff. So that also helps.
Yeah, definitely agree. Cool. Let's talk a little bit about the ideation phase. Stepping back a little bit, like when you're identifying a personal project in the first place, you're looking at learning new technologies. You've got to get some value out of this personal project too. And that's a lot of it. You're also looking at like delivering something of value, creating a portfolio of projects here. I'd love to hear a little bit more about like how you kind of identify the right personal project in the first place and what things you're considering as you go out and scope that.
Yeah, I'm pretty picky, really.
Yeah.
I really want to. There's quite a few boxes that I want to tick. So one of them is that it needs to be interesting. I mean, it needs to be something that I find intellectually challenging and interesting, and I think it's sort of a problem sort of worth solving. So that's important. And also something that I know a little bit about, which is one of the reasons I sort of gravitated towards the load forecasting, because I've spent quite a bit of time in the energy industry, so I know enough to be dangerous on the data side. There. Other thing is I'm trying to build a portfolio that is appealing to people who may want to collaborate with me, partner with me on different projects. I'm trying to make sure I've got a good variety of interesting tech that's represented there. I also want to learn. I want to be. Every project that I take on has got to be sort of like a challenge where I've got to learn some new tech, or I've got to learn a new algorithm, or learn some new data wrangling sort of.
No better way to learn than by doing it, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I find that my personal learning style is definitely learning by doing. So doing real projects where I've got real targets and sort of deadlines, self-imposed deadlines and things like that really helped me. I mean, I've done a heap of like online training courses and everything, and that's another motivating factor too for what to pick is that quite often what I want to do is I want to implement what I've learned in one of those training courses. So for example, the load forecasting project, I just finished up the deep learning specialization, from deeplearning.ai. And so I wanted to try out a bunch of those different algorithms. And so I deliberately sort of scoped this to sort of implement, trying to solve that problem with deep learning.
Yeah, that's a balance there, because what I don't want to do is kind of like fit the problem to the tech. But I think in personal projects, we're given like a little bit of leeway as long as we're like kind of like aware that we're doing it. Because like I want to apply deep learning hands-on, so I'm going to go choose a project that lends itself well to that. But when you're actually in industry, like I coach people like, hey, start with a logistic regression, see if that solves a problem, now move to deep learning. But for the personal project, like I definitely agree with you. That's kind of you got to create kind of learning opportunity around it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's one of the things that James Skinner told me. One of his bits of feedback on that project was, Well, I love that you're doing deep, applying a bunch of deep learning on this. But hey, have you? I think it'd be
You thought
better,
of logistic
even
regression.
even better if you sort of through another couple of different styles, like do some do a linear regression or something like that, logistic regression, and see how those see how those do. And so yeah, so I put that on the the to do future project piece, because
Yeah.
it's that big trade-off, right, that you're coping with all the time, which is how do you scope these things and how do you get them out the door? Because I'm very curious. I could keep working on these projects for a very long time, but I want to crank through them. I want to get more and more out the door. So you have to draw the line somewhere.
Yeah, okay, so that's really interesting. Let's dive in there a little bit and we'll circle back to some other topics I wanted to get to, because that's something that very much stood out about your personal project is, and I'll even just share screen here. We can talk through this project here. So the future work section stands out because this is something I would almost even call like tech debt. This is kind of taking note of what you'd like to do next instead of like actually doing it, which really, really helps us like scope this down to like projects that can actually be digested, delivered, and kind of prevents like scope creep. Like that's a common term in the real world that we want to prevent. So I really liked that you did this future work section. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts behind creating that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is something I've seen other people include in
Yeah.
their posts, so that's part of it. Another thing, it's a psychological thing for me, because yeah, all of these things, the things that I know, oh wow, look, it could have been better. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that I could have done, to make the model better or to make it more explainable or something like that. But you can't do all of it. You can't do all of it, or else you never get
Yeah.
finished, right? So it actually helps me to be just writing down all of these different things that could be future follow-up projects. Make me feel better about the fact that I didn't do them, and also I think they're really, one of the other things is these are sort of placeholders for follow-up expansions and extensions that I can do. So when I'm thinking about all the different things that I could do next, sort of all of the things in here are sort of candidate things that it might be that one of these things really is a pretty cool thing that would be highly applicable and appealing and helpful to people. So they're actually things that I would be interested in doing. Like, for example, there's one thing on this list, clustering the load profiles into sort of similar groups using k-nearest neighbors or something like that to break out those different styles of load profiles. I think would be very interesting, and perhaps even having different models for each of those different styles of load profiles.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I like these here. I think the thing that stands out to me about it is that it's very much a skill that serves people really well in once they land the job, because for like a real project, you're going to have the MVP that you have to deliver today, and then you're going to have the stuff that you would like to go do to deliver it.
Yeah.
You have to kind of stack that and prioritize that. And sometimes I feel like it's not about doing all the things to get to the perfect project, but it's about knowing what those things are, or at least like what things to try. And that's kind of what stands out here. It's super cool.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things that I've had to become very good at over my career is sort of prioritization and scoping and managing expectations. So it's sort of like just a natural part of the process of anything that I sort of take on is having good discipline around that.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's a good skill to kind of highlight here. There's another thing that stood out, and now I'm looking for it. It was kind of here it is, comparing different models against each other. So you mentioned you did get some feedback in terms of like comparing other models here. I'd love to kind of hear just what that process looked like.
Yeah. Well, I was influenced by a few different papers. One of the ones that I listed as a reference down below And another one, I was influenced a bit by the tutorial that I used from TensorFlow. But mainly it was, hey, I was sort of broadly scoped around deep learning, and specifically around recurrent neural networks. That was something I was particularly interested in, and a couple of different flavors of that to sort of work out which would provide the best accuracy given, a relatively simple implementation. Like I didn't do a whole heap of hyperparameter tuning or anything like that. That wasn't the focus. The focus was, hey, look, let's just throw fairly vanilla, models at this problem and see which one, I suppose, inherently, worked the best without doing a whole heap of hyperparameter tuning or anything like that. And yeah, that's how I came up with the list. And yeah, I definitely, if I had more time, I probably would have thrown in, a couple of linear flavors as well.
Sure. Yeah. I bet they wouldn't work as well for this kind of data, but it would be interesting that you don't know until you try it. Cool. Well, I'll definitely link this project so people can read through it. Let's jump into some of the questions I had. So one thing that you're doing as you work through these personal projects is you're creating a portfolio, you're creating content. And you mentioned to me earlier, there's kind of a way that you're sharing this content as you create it, sharing it before it's done along the way, creating some engagement on LinkedIn as well, building your network that way. Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So that's sort of part of what I'm trying to do with my networking approach, is using these projects as a way to get some eyeballs, get connected to interesting people, perhaps involved in some other interesting projects. And so having good ideas to share is sort of an important part of that. And one of the things that sort of works pretty well for me here is not saving everything for sort of a big final post at the end of the project.
Yeah.
Because the fun thing that happens with these projects is there are little intermediate sort of milestones and discoveries and breakthroughs that sort of happen as you're going along the journey. And those things are really fun to share, and people seem to be very interested in those. So I had a really interesting feature selection breakthrough on the load forecasting project, and I just made a post about that because it was something that I'd sort of been struggling with for a little while. Had a breakthrough and sort of shared, hey, look, this is how I got over this hump. And that, so I think being able to share those little intermediate things along, ideas or breakthroughs along the way is fun, and it's definitely helped me to get some, to make some more connections.
Yeah, I could even get like a little bit of maybe even product feedback along the way if you get lucky. I like that a lot. The parallel I would draw to that in terms of just like aligning that approach with a real project in the real world is it's kind of similar to like not wanting to, what are the terms, like analysis paralysis, or like striving towards perfectionism, like trying to get things perfect before you share it with a stakeholder, with other people you're working with. I always encourage people, like, hey, if you've got something that's half finished, or you found some kind of intermediate value along the way, like speak up, start talking about it, and we're just better together. Like when you're working as a team that way, I just feel like that's kind of a better approach in all projects, personal and network. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. One of the things that helps me decide, and this is the fun thing about having the collaborator too, right? It's like when I have something to share, like I'm sending them an IM and saying, oh cool, look at this. I don't know, got this model working or had this breakthrough or whatever. And so that was a good sort of analog for, well, hey, look, if it's something that my customer collaborator is interested in as sort of like a bit of an update, it may be something that may be applicable for a broader audience as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's talk about ROI. This is always the hard part of every project, like tying it back to ROI. And I did see on your latest personal project that you had done some work with like comparing against a baseline and kind of measuring the impact of the project itself. This is really hard to do. Yeah, talk us through it.
Yeah. So there's a couple of pieces. So one is sort of like a technical target or baseline is always very helpful to have when you're working on any project, right? Having something numerical that you're focusing on, and hopefully something singular, if you know what I mean, so that so you don't have multiple things that you're trading off, but you've got one thing. So the thing I was investigating in the load forecasting one from a technical goal point of view was accuracy, was like an accuracy score, and sort of comparing accuracy scores. And I used a baseline from a paper that I found, a 1 week persistence model. So that was just really good to have an anchor, so that and something also that's sort of relatively well known in the industry.
Is it this part here? Am I looking at the right thing?
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So
This is cool.
That definitely helped.
Yeah.
And then I think probably more directly to your question, though, the other big question is from an industry or a stakeholder point of view. It's the sort of so what question, the dollars and cents question. And for that one, I was very thankful to James Skinner for pushing me to include this. It was a really good idea. It was to say, okay, if this is the best, highest performing model, what would happen? What would be the financial impact of using that highest performing model as compared with this sort of industry baseline of a 1 week persistence model? And so that really helped to do that. And the other interesting thing about that was, well, now I had to go and dig around and find some more data, right? Like, in order to convert these to do that calculation, I had to actually go and find a data source for day ahead pricing and real-time pricing for a certain day, so that I could apply those to come up with a real dollar impact, and also just being able to express it in terms that are meaningful to people in the industry, because in the energy and the utilities industry, quite often, like a lot of the time, people talk about costs and benefits and things like that in terms of per customer. So if they've got millions of customers or tens of millions of customers or something like that, then if you've got some sort of a benefit, it might look pretty small on a per customer basis, but utilities people just do all these calculations in their head, and they say, oh wow, if I get, I don't know, like 2 cents or 3 cents per customer per day, they're very good at doing that, scaling up that math in their head. So expressing it in ways that the people in the industry can relate to also, I think, is important.
Yeah, this is a step beyond just like your model accuracy metrics. Like if you're looking at AUC, F1, whatever metric you're really using to measure how good that model is at predicting its target, this takes it a step further, because there's always some reason that we're trying to get a model to predict some target variable. And it's usually a business reason, and there's usually other metrics around that, but we may or may not be able to directly optimize for, but you can definitely measure it and test it. Very cool. Yeah, I'll definitely share their articles so everyone can read through it. Other question for you, and this kind of just crossed my mind, we haven't really talked about it earlier, but data. How hard was it to get your hands on data? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, it wasn't too bad, but I was very glad to have collaborators to work with, especially on the breast cancer survival model that I'm working on right now. that one, I would have had no idea without the help from from my sort of collaborator there. I would have had no chance of getting my hand on the right data, or even finding the right websites. So that was very helpful to him. Sorry, to me. And the other thing that he also did is not only he said, hey, look, get the genetic expression data from here, get the clinical data from here,
Huh?
get the survival statistics and data from here, and plug them all together. And then he also gave some advice on, and that's like, you know, that's 20,000 genes alone,
Yeah.
plus however many other features. But then he also said, hey, all right. And so initially, when you first get started, when you're sort of just trying to get a model out as fast as you possibly can, which is something I also sort of would recommend. He helped a lot by suggesting, and you might want to start with these. And he marked up and said, hey, these are the features that you should start with your first model, rather than using all 25,000. Right? Start with these so that you can get something out, and then you can start iterating and bringing in more data. So that was very useful.
Yeah, I mean, 2 points there. Number one is like Kaggle data is great, but it's not impressive. It's easy to get. What's more impressive is like, can we work with messier data that represents the kind of data we might find within a real project that hasn't been touched that much, that needs cleaning, that kind of stuff. So I feel like finding your own data sources is really
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the whole first section of that blog post, and it's actually quite a lot of that blog post is cleaning up the data, right?
Isn't
It's
that what
like,
they say? It's like 80% of our time is cleaning data.
yeah, data wrangling, data cleaning, working with smart meter data was really fun. But there was a lot of sort of pre-processing that had to happen to make it usable and get it ready. And actually, it was one of the things that was really a big breakthrough. There was the cyclical encoding of a lot of those features. So that really helped the accuracy. It was a big step up in accuracy.
Interesting. Yeah. You mentioned something too about the features, working with like the other contributors on the project or stakeholders here. One thing that I found that maybe sounds like you experienced here is I can take a data set and just like start throwing it into models and like see what features work without really understanding the problem space. And that's not very effective. What's much more effective is to either understand the problem space myself and use that to kind of like help me identify what features should even go into the model just based on theory. Or if I don't know the problem space, go to a subject matter expert and say, hey, what features do you think would actually predict what we're trying to attempt here? And it sounds like you were kind of getting some advice there, like where to even start in terms of which data sets.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely doing both, because one of the cool things, obviously, about deep learning is the fact that you can be surprised, right?
Yeah, stuff that people didn't think of. Yep.
You've got no idea in the end. If you it is a reasonable approach is throw everything at the wall and apply some reasonable feature selection, but you should be ready to be surprised by the data, by what actually, and that's a lot of the fun, right? Is being surprised. Wow, there's a whole sort of feature family or an individual feature that suddenly, like, incredibly important, comes out very high on importance, and it's like, what,
or like strange feature relationships, like alone they're not valuable, but you put three together you wouldn't think of. Definitely some cool stuff there.
I mean, that's one of the really fun parts about data science, right? Is making those discoveries. Both, I mean, it's rewarding in both ways. The ones that are intuitively, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then the ones where, just because of your background, you might not have the right intuition, and it's like, oh wow, what the, why is that? And then digging into, and maybe talking to some subject matter experts about why. Both of those are interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've seen both for sure. Let's talk a little bit about tools and tech, and then we'll maybe close with like when good is good enough on personal projects. That's one of my favorite topics to scope
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
But first, tools and tech. So it looks like you were using like TensorFlow, Python, definitely deep diving to some neural nets. What's like your approach to learning these kinds of new software and like machine learning AI tools?
Yeah, well, I always like to have a problem that I'm working on. I mean, I'm not so much a just work through the tutorial sort of a guy. I'm much more, hey,
Yeah.
Or if I am going to do that to learn something, I'll bring my own data set, right? I won't use the data set or the problem. I'll try to fit the my problem to to their tutorial. So that's usually the way I sort of go about it. I sometimes get a bit impatient and just go ahead and like try to just make it work and skip the
Try to
tutorial
force it.
stuff.
Yep.
Usually to my chagrin. But I get impatient. I want results, and but definitely learning by doing. So what I really like about the online learning stuff that I've been doing, a lot of those courses, the GAN courses and the deep learning courses, is the combination of theory and practical. But really, to get the practical, I think you have to go out and build it yourself from sort of well, not first principles, but using the right level of library to to implement that particular algorithm.
Yeah, it's how you develop like knowledge of like the gotchas and like kind of your best practices around it. Like I'm the same way. I just have to do it hands-on. I can watch tutorials, I can read it about it, but until like I try it on my own data, then I start to see like it's almost like feeling like customer pain. It's like, oh, when people try to do this, they have trouble with this part, that part, and you kind of like find your way through it. Plus I feel like it's just good for my brain. It helps me remember stuff. Just do it hands-on.
Yeah, and you just build up, your own toolkit, right?
You
Like,
do, yeah.
as you go along, various parts get faster because you've done them before, and you can apply some techniques or some libraries that you've used before, and so everything is just like a flywheel. It gets faster.
It's almost just like the value of experience, like you're just building hands-on experience, which is so valuable.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's talk about my favorite topic. When is good enough? Prioritization. We're talking about that trade-off between like quality, scope, time to market, that kind of thing. I know you've had a ton of experience with this in the real world, in past positions. Taking that and applying it to a personal project. I think there's a lot for us to learn there.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that I struggle with, and I'm not by any means like perfect at it.
It's a hard one. It's one that you just learn from like, I don't know, like war stories, just like experience. Yeah,
because I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, and so my immediate reaction, my immediate sort of instinct that I have to fight is that I always want stuff to be better. I'm very critical of my own work, and I always want what I put out to be better, always better. And it's never, in my brain, it's never quite good enough, right? And so you really have to, I find I have to really, really fight that instinct to make sure that you get a reasonable time to market, right? Like you have to get these things out the door. I'm trying to build a portfolio. I'm trying to get a number of these things out the door. So so I think a lot of just the classic scope management stuff is is important. Like, what's the goal? Have you been able to sort of talk through this with someone who can help you to understand what really matters to to stakeholders in this space, and make sure that you're sort of focusing, that you're focusing on that, and prioritizing. I find a couple of times throughout these projects, I've got the classic list. I use Trello just with a list of, hey, here's all the amazing things I can do. And then I just sort of, I rank them, and I put, okay, well, here's my.
You make a cut line.
This is my cut
every time I had
line.
to do that.
When I get to here, I'm publishing.
Yeah.
It's
Smart.
going out the door, and then all that stuff that's below the line, I get guilty. I think, oh man, I can make it better with this, but you have to get it out.
What do you think about the difference between like many small projects, probably they'd have to be aggressively scoped, versus a large, like in-depth project? How do you kind of balance the value?
Yeah. Well, I like smaller. In general, I think smaller is better. But if you can somehow, if it sort of fits, if you can have them all sort of building on each other, then towards a bigger goal, then I think that's the perfect world, right? The perfect world would be, hey, can I build, I don't know, every week or every 2 weeks or something, can I build a piece, and then after 4 or 5 weeks, all of those pieces are connected together and the sum is bigger than just the parts put together. That would be the ideal. But in general, smaller.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that, because if you look at what you're getting out of the personal project in terms of like networking, learning new tools, I think it is important to aggressively scope these things. And then as you're saying, if you like chunk things up and like kind of build iteratively towards something larger, you're not going like heads down too long without coming up for air. You're still going to be able to produce things as you go, which I really think is a good way to approach this.
Yeah, and it's all a judgment call. Like, for example, the ROI piece of the networking, of the load management and load forecasting piece, that I hadn't factored that in at all at the start of the project. When my collaborator sort of said, hey, this will be way more effective if you can put some dollars on it, I said, well, okay, that's now above the line. And that probably cost me like a week, right? Having to go and find all that data, or find the data for the pricing, for the day ahead pricing and the real time pricing. Took me a while to find a decent, a decent data set for that. And anyway, so yeah, it's always trading off.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And that's a real life skill here that I think is like worth simulating in terms of a personal project. It's not just about executing the tech and delivering some kind of outcome. You're like really showing that you can kind of project manage the project itself, in terms of like prioritization. Well, cool. I think that covers like most of the questions I had. Do you have any other tips or tricks, things on your mind, just something you've learned through doing these personal projects that you'd like to share?
I just think the trying to get your hands on collaborators is probably the one thing. If there's one thing that I could leave with people, it's try to not do this stuff in isolation, right?
Yeah, you don't have to do it alone.
Because it will help your stuff to stand out too. Like it'll be different. Because you're collaborating, it will be better. You'll be challenged. And it will, I think you'll end up with a better result.
Yeah. I think that's perfect advice. That's definitely what I was hoping you'd say. I wanted to get out of here. Well, I love that. Thank you so much, James. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and link your project down below about the forecasting, the kind of like the electric load forecasting. So that's the first project. I know you've got another one coming out around like the breast cancer research. So when that one's ready, I can definitely link that as well. But thank you so much for joining the show and sharing this experience with our audience. Appreciate you.
Yeah, Claire, great working with you.
Yeah, you as well. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.